Good day, and welcome to another edition of Art Talk. I am the host, Laura Beldavs at Cedarburg Public Library, and today we are talking to local artist Jack Pachuta, and he has a very interesting background. He originally is schooled in radio and television and has degrees in both, and has later in life decided to become a printmaker. And Jack, how about we talk a little bit about that? What brought you to printmaking?
Well, what brought me to printmaking, Laura, it really was a friend of mine, an artist named Sylvia Chontler, who lived in Cedarburg, and I admired her work quite a bit. So we talked about it, and she was working with an artist here locally named Paul Yank, and Paul was an artistic genius. And I say was because Paul died in October of last year. Mm-hmm. But he did lots of things around the area. He worked at the Milwaukee Public Museum. He also helped with the Wisconsin Pavilion at the World's Fair in New York. And there are just fountains and sculptures around the area that Paul achieved in his life.
So that was his medium, was sculptures and fountains?
He always signed
3D?
his name Paul J. Yank S.
Okay.
Even when he was doing prints.
Uh-huh.
Even his prints have the S after it for sculptor. That was his main reason for being in art. But I went there for an 8-week course, mm-hmm. and I stayed 16 years.
Yes. So tell us about this course, because you say that Paul Yank was a sculptor, but you are a printmaker. So.
Well, Paul was a master of all sorts of media, and at a certain point in life, Paul died when he was 88, and his sculptures, by the way, one will be installed here at Boy Scout Park.
Oh, okay.
It's May. It'll be installed this year, hopefully mm-hmm. this month, if not this month, next month. And Paul, at a certain point, couldn't do all the lifting and all the things that were required of being a sculptor because he worked big. And he went into printmaking. He could also paint, of course. He was a potter. You name it, and Paul could do it in the field of art, photographer. So printmaking became his passion. And there are 3 presses now at the Ozaki Art Center, which are sitting idle right now, unfortunately.
Yes.
But Paul's daughter, Karen, is also a sculptress, and she plans on revitalizing the art center. She'll be here when the new sculpture is donated in Boy Scout Park. So Paul got into printmaking, and he started giving classes in printmaking, and I started taking the classes. And, you know, I've always been able to draw. I've always been good at art. But at a certain point, you find your medium. Mm-hmm. Right? You find what you really like. Mm-hmm. And I just fell in love with printmaking, and I was there for a long time.
Now, is there a specific, there are many different kinds of printmaking. Did you learn in that 8-week course the different kinds?
Well, Paul always called them monoprints. The reason being there was one of each kind. Mm-hmm. And most of the prints that I do, and you have 5 of them here in the library right now, come off of 2 different presses. There was one press that, in effect, a flatbed press where you press different objects onto an ink plate. And then he had this wonderful German press that wouldn't fit in my living room. My wife will not let me put it in my living room, Laura. It's just, what a shame, what a shame. But it is a press that has a drum. And you can transfer images to the drum and then run those images off on different backgrounds, and each one is unique.
Yes.
Because the background is unique, and then you finish each one off in a very unique way, so they are monoprints. Now, we always said to Paul, you've got to get your own term, because the way that he would produce a monoprint is not what you will find in a textbook. Mm-hmm. You know, I have done art shows, and I will have people come up to me and say, how is that a monoprint? Well, mono means one, and there's only one of them, and it is a print.
Right.
Therefore, it is a monoprint.
Right. But your works are very interesting because you have the printed background, but then you build on top of it.
I render in ink and colored pencil, which, of course, I learned from Paul also. Mm-hmm. But I've always been able to draw, and so this combines the printmaking with the drawing. Mm-hmm. And the rendering is the real key to the things that I do, because most of my images, the finishing work is what people notice. And I get lots of comments about the way they are shaded and the way the colors work together. I like to use vibrant colors, mm-hmm. and I like to layer different colors on top of each other, and it gives it a very unique look.
Yes, there's a lot of things that come through from the background that make it very interesting.
That's because we make the ink transparent.
Mm-hmm.
So when you do the background, you have all these wonderful shapes and objects and textures, and then you mix it with a certain kind of varnish that makes the ink transparent.
Very interesting.
So then when you stencil the ink on, some of the background comes through, and you can do that in many different ways. And sometimes you don't really know what color it's going to turn out looking like,
right?
But whatever you do is the right color.
So I'm sure your artwork in the process of making it takes a lot of turns. That maybe you had an idea in the beginning, but it certainly evolves.
There are two ways of doing that.
Okay.
For one thing, I told people this. I would go into the studio and people would say, "What are you working on today?" And the answer was, "I really don't know." Because you get into the studio and you make the backgrounds, and the backgrounds look like something.
Right.
And then when you see what the background looks like, you get this idea, and suddenly you have a piece of art. There were many days I would go into that studio and really not even know what the product would be like, but there was always a product. Now, I say that day, it takes more than one day. When you are working with inks, for one thing, you have to let the ink dry, right? And then you layer inks, and then you put on the pencil and the markers and all the other stuff. I tell people, too, when you're my age and you ask for colored pencils and magic markers for Christmas, they kind of look at you strangely, going into a second childhood. But the final work is all done with colored pencil and markers. And it takes a while. I could tell you about the whole process, but if you have a couple hours, I'd be happy to tell you about it. It's not a simple process. I tell people it's not a quick paint. It's not like Van Gogh, who went out in the morning and brought back 3 to 5 paintings every night. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
It takes a while.
Yeah, there's always that conception people have that artwork, artists are just cranking out pictures one after another. And for some artists, they might be very disciplined and have that ability to, or at least that's their style of working, is that they're very quick and fast, whereas other artists, it's more contemplative and more of a process, and sometimes the materials that you work with demand that you have to work slower. And
plein air artists are marvels at this, because they will start a painting in the morning, and by the afternoon it's done. They can do 2 or 3 paintings a day because they're used to being outside and working in that environment.
Right.
This is not that way. This requires presses. It requires waiting for ink to dry, and sometimes you just have to step back and take a look at what you really have, because a big part of it is seeing things in there that you might not otherwise see.
Right.
One of the things that Paul would always say, and we started to write down all of the Yankisms, the things that Paul would say. One of the things he would say is, take what it gives you. You didn't know it was going to be there, but it's there.
Right.
So use it because it's there. And a lot of my work, and out here too, a couple of the things that you have hanging in the library right now, I didn't see the images at the beginning, but after a while you take a look at it and you see something, and lo and behold, it becomes part of the art.
I used to do a surface design class and learn how to dye fabric, and a lot of times you would put in a piece of fabric in a dye pot, and after a time take it out, and the way the fabric and the dyes interacted with each other came up with some very surprising results, and very much the same process. So.
And that is one of the processes. Now, another process, and we talked about the fact that I was a featured artist at Channel 1036 auction a few years ago, and they asked me to be part of the Wisconsin collection. So I thought, what do I want to do? I picked whooping cranes because, of course, we are International Crane Foundation. We've got cranes all over the place here. Right now, the sandhills are everywhere. There's that lovely call that attaches to the wild, and I hear it in the backyard of my house every morning. I live out in the town of Cedarburg. And the whoopers, George Archibald, who founded the International Crane Foundation in Baraboo, they reestablished the migrating flock of whooping cranes from Wisconsin. So I knew I wanted to do whooping cranes. So I went to different sources on the internet, and I just found images of whooping cranes, and I made very cursory, very short look, not really detailed cutouts of cranes. And I wanted to do the mating dance. So I started putting different pieces of cranes together and just kind of looked at them, and finally I found an arrangement that I liked, and I rendered it and printed it onto different backgrounds, And they auctioned it off at channel 1036, and they auctioned off 100 copies of the print they made, and I got a nice handshake. But I love those people. I like channels 1036. They did a great job with that art auction they had on channels 1036.
Tell us a little bit more about some of your other pieces that are hanging in the library. There's one called The Shaman.
Well, the pieces that are hanging in the library, for the most part, you'll see that my art is outside art. I'll put it that way because I don't do still lifes. I don't do things on the inside. Most of my art takes place outside. And if you take a look at the art, there is one piece that developed to be an inside piece of art, but only because it looked like an inside piece of art. But I tend to focus on wildlife. I tend to focus on the outdoors. Mm-hmm. I've got prints of whitewater rafters, of mountain climbers, and some of the prints you have here. You've got a shaman that is right in the middle of that exhibit, and that, again, came with all kinds of symbols. I have sold that to some Native Americans. For one thing, I was told that I was one of the few Caucasians that one of them ever met who could draw a Native American face.
Oh.
And the other thing was, mm-hmm. he said, I see symbolism in here that the average person wouldn't see. Because there's feathers, there's turquoise, there's all sorts mm-hmm. of things in there. Mm-hmm. And that developed, too, based upon the background.
Sure.
You know, I could see the shaman in the background, mm-hmm. and just like when you are growing up with the books that say connect the dots, I connected the dots, and lo and behold, I had a shaman. Now, that was one of the pieces out there. I have a deer out there, too, and that deer is one of several deer, but that deer is printed on a background that was another piece of art. Mm-hmm. It is in front of a tree that is what is called a collagraph. And a collagraph is taking different pieces and this is going to sound like kindergarten, rubber cementing them together. Remember rubber cement and all in kindergarten? Yes. Well, guess what? We still use rubber cement. And that tree was rubber cemented together and printed on different backgrounds. And I have one with that tree that has a hummingbird in it, one that has a blue heron in it. Mm-hmm. And I thought, wait, why don't I combine two things? I'll combine this piece of art with the deer, and I printed the deer on top.
Okay.
And if anybody comes in and takes a look at that print, that deer, and you mentioned it, almost seems transparent mm-hmm. because some of the background comes through. So you're looking at the deer, but you can see some of the tree coming through the deer. It's almost as if that deer is hiding in the woods someplace.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of symbolism there. So also tell me about calotypes, because you spoke about monotypes, but...
Collagraph?
Or collagraph,
yeah, collagraph is really just taking different pieces and... I don't want to say gluing them, because gluing, you can glue them, but what you do is you place them on an inked plate, mm-hmm. and then put that plate on a press, put a sheet of paper on top of what you have on the press, and then just press the ink into the paper.
Okay.
And the shapes that you get, you can work with. And the paper that we use is BFK Reeves, which is a very high rag content paper. It's mm-hmm. a printmaking paper. And the reason for that is that with the ink and the high rag content, when you put ink on it, it doesn't stay on the surface. It just absorbs it. It just, sucks it in, mm-hmm. and it keeps the colors vibrant. It has no coating on it, so the ink actually goes into the paper. And I'll tell you a very quick story about that. I was at the Picasso Museum in Malaga, mm-hmm. in Spain, and there are several Picasso museums in Spain. And I was looking at some of the printmaking that Picasso did. I looked in the corner of one of the pieces, and it said BFK Reeves. So I don't know, did Picasso use my paper or did I use Picasso's paper? I'm not sure which one it was.
Yes.
So that paper's been around for a long time, and there are special papers that are used for printmaking mm-hmm. because they do keep the colors vibrant.
Right.
And that's one of the keys to getting a good print.
Sure, yeah, that's very important in art making, is making sure that your materials are archival and are able to take the materials that you put on top of it.
Exactly. And the pencils and the markers that I alluded to, and anybody who knows art will know this brand is Prismacolor.
Sure, yeah.
Prismacolor, because with the pencils, it's a very high wax content. Mm-hmm. So when you use Prismacolor pencils, the colors blend. So you can put colors on top of each other, and you get a color that you didn't anticipate, but it's always the right color. That's amazing. The final product always has the right colors in it. Even though you didn't realize it would be the right colors at the beginning, they always end up being the correct colors.
Now, you talk about looking at nature as inspiration. How do you get that inspiration? Are you looking at photos, or are you taking walks outside? Well,
a lot of my prints of nature, I have a wolf, and in the background, when I came off the press, I could see a wolf.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a buffalo. When it came off the press, I could see a buffalo.
Mm-hmm.
There are lots of times when they just are there.
Sure.
And one of the things that Paul used to do, he did this with all the artists that are printmakers, we'd have a background come off, and we would turn it in all four directions. What do you see here?
Mm-hmm.
What do you see here? What do you see here?
Mm-hmm.
And we'd find the direction that was correct and work with it that way. In the buffalo that I alluded to, you could actually see the shape of a buffalo in one of the shapes. Now, of course, I had to render, all the parts of the buffalo,
sure,
but you could see the buffalo.
Sure.
So it just happened to be there.
Sure. So you tend to see more animals in these shapes rather than people.
And I see people too. I mean, you have another piece in here that is a person looks like a monk, a cowl. When the background came off of the press, the shapes that looked like the monk's cowl were there.
From medieval times?
It looks like medieval.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know what it was going to be, but that's what it looked like. And in that print, you're going to see a torch, only because when I finished the robe, it looked like medieval. And if you're going to have someone in a medieval setting, you probably need a torch. It looks like a castle. So that's why that one has the torch in it. But I have two other versions of that very same image in the robe,
mm-hmm.
and one of them is I did a dark skin version, and this is one of the things that you do with art. You experiment a bit, because I had done the Native American. I had never done a dark complexion, so what I did was I took one of the pieces and
mm-hmm.
I intentionally did a dark complexion because I wanted to see how it would look.
Mm-hmm.
You want to expand your horizons, so
sure.
I did that. So there is a piece, and it looks like a Moor in
mm-hmm.
a robe. Then I have one other piece, and they all have a table in front of them. If you take a look, and there's a chalice in their hand, and I always make it sort of a meal type environment.
Mm-hmm.
And the one that you have hanging here in the library, I had one person come up to me and say, which saint is that? And I always say, which saint would you like it to be?
Right.
Because I don't really care. It is an image, and you can figure out who you want that to be.
Right. Yeah, part of looking at artwork is bringing your own meaning to it. So.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So, you worked for a long time in TV and radio.
TV and radio. I also was a professional speaker for about 11 years of my life, traveling around the world.
Uh-huh.
So when I tell people about my background, I tell them right up front, I have other than Paul's training, I have no formal artistic background, but I could always draw.
Sure, yeah. So what made you finally cross over that from TV and radio to the art?
A lot of it was a day called 9/11.
Oh.
Being a professional speaker, when 9/11, I was actually on the platform, as they say in the profession,
mm-hmm.
giving a presentation when the towers came down.
Oh, okay.
And at the end of the presentation, the person who was running the association I was speaking to said, "We're under terrorist attack." And lo and behold, you don't go and speak to people when they're not even there, and you don't fly. And so I had the art background. I also, this, I'm a writer too, and I write murder mystery events.
Okay.
And so my murder mystery events also took over,
mm-hmm.
and I now have lots of websites that sell murder mystery events too.
Oh, okay.
So I am a speaker, I'm a writer, and I'm an artist.
So, tell us about these murder mystery events.
Oh, I'm glad you asked that. There are different ways you can do this. I have kits online at mysteriesonthenet.com that you can download and do your own party, or you can hire me to facilitate an event. And I've also done full-scale theatrical productions as murder mysteries. And right now the pandemic is, thank God, finally becoming less of a problem. But I've been doing Zoom mysteries.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Let me tell you about one in particular. I was booked by a woman on the Isle of Guernsey.
Okay.
In the English Channel.
Wow.
And we did a Zoom mystery for her daughter's 21st birthday. Her daughter was in Bristol in England, and the guests at the party were in Turkey, India, Canada, the U.S., England, of course. They were all over the world. So we had an international audience.
Wow.
And when I say we, I've got a group of actors. Some are local. You'll know some of the people here in Cedarburg. But I have a group of actors I've worked with for quite a while, and we're the cast.
Okay.
So we have taken a professional stage production and put it on the internet. And even my cast, by the way, is nationwide. I've got an actress in Virginia, one in Louisiana. I've got a person in Texas I work with. I've got a gentleman in Oregon who is one of my licensees that also does the acting. So even the cast is spread out nationwide.
Wow, you're multi-talented, Jack.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's fun, and it's in my wheelhouse, if you know what I mean. All these things are what I do.
So do you find in your artwork that these other things come into your artwork as well?
Well, I do have a series of mystery posters, if that's what you're asking.
Okay.
Mystery tonight. But yeah, everything crosses over. When you say it's one thing, it's never just one thing.
No, it isn't.
One thing inspires another thing, and you go with it. And part of what you have to do, and you know this, is that in the arts, you have to know when to stop. That's the hardest part of any piece of art, is knowing when it's done. Because you always want to go and tinker, and it's the same with writing. You always want to tinker a little bit, and it's the same with speaking. You always want to change it a little bit. So the hardest part is to know when you are finished.
Yes. Well, but don't you find sometimes you think you're finished and you look at it again and thought, oh, maybe if I had done this or that?
All the time.
Yes.
and you are your own worst critic.
Yeah.
And normally the things that you go back and change are small things that nobody else would even notice. It's a real minor detail, but you look at it and you say, no, that's not quite right. And you do something different, and nobody else would even know you did it.
So it sounds like you like to experiment with a lot of things. Do you tell us about maybe how you might approach one of your artworks?
One of my artworks? Well, again, it's one of two ways. Either I have something in mind and I create the image and find the background that is appropriate. The other way, of course, is to take a background and figure out what that background says to me. And a lot of times, that's the best art. You know, I have one that you don't have in the library, but I have in my studio at home, that is an Indian stalking in a wintry background. And when it came off the press, I could see a snowshoe in one location. I could kind of see a face in one location. I could see a quiver in another location. And just like I said before, I connected the dots, and lo and behold, there it was. But see, there's a challenge in that too. Because you see something, and now the challenge becomes, how do I make it into a work of art that actually says something? That's
cohesive.
Absolutely.
Now, I watched your video that you did with the Cedarburg Art Museum, where Samantha Landry interviewed you, and it has you in your studio, and you're showing Samantha how you work with some of your how you create your artworks, and you brought out a bag of pieces of stencils.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that.
It's just like the kids with a toy box. You know, you open the lid and there's lots of stuff in it. What do I want to play with right now? Well, what it is when you are doing the prints, you make stencils to stencil on different colors. And when you're making stencils, you actually have pieces, of course, that you're cutting out.
Right.
Well, Paul taught us this. Keep all those pieces. Because then what you do is you take out the old pieces and you start arranging them on an inked plate, and you find an arrangement that looks really nice, and you work with that arrangement. So all those pieces are pieces from previous prints that are just hanging around. And I don't know if you've been onto my Facebook page, but I put this on the Facebook page recently because Paul was such a wonderful person and wonderful individual who inspired you. When I first worked with Paul, the shaman that I mentioned came into existence so roughly 12 to 14 years ago. Time flies when you're having fun, Laura.
Yeah.
So I had another of the same image printed on a different background, and I finished it off last month. So between the two shamans, the one that you have hanging here and the one that is now in my studio,
Right.
is 15 years difference.
Wow.
And it is, I won't say the exact same image because you're always tinkering and it's different colors and different images that you've incorporated, but they are 15 years apart off of the same run, off of the same series. We'd call them a series because it's the same image on top of different backgrounds. 15 years between the works of the same series.
Sure. I mean, I think that's common with artists that they revisit themes that they worked on before because, it's something obviously that interested them. And maybe there's something new that occurs to them later on that they want to try to work into.
I'll tell you another story about that. I probably 8 to 10 years ago, roughly, I did a series of profiles and also birds in flight of the same bird. So there'd be the profile of the bald eagle and the bald eagle in flight. And I was able to use that same image to make an osprey, which of course is a Seahawk, but we don't talk about Seahawks around here because of the Seattle Seahawks. We are Green Bay Packer fans. And I used that same image for different birds. In fact, I made one into a barn owl that was purchased by a company in Madison called Epic. They're a software company. As in the art world, they say we make an epic sale. Well, that was an epic sale.
Yeah.
Well, Tammy Strauss at the Pink Llama Gallery said, there's a woman in here who really loves your art, but she wants to know if you have any ravens.
Oh.
I said, well, no. Well, guess what? I now have ravens.
There you go.
Because that same series, I had some extras that were on different backgrounds.
Yeah.
That also had the profile of the eagle and the eagle flying in. I was able to take one of them and to modify it, make it into the profile of a raven, and take the flying bird and make that into a raven also. So I now have a raven.
There you go. So you've mentioned that Paul Yank was a very inspirational and important part of your art life.
Yes.
Are there other artists that have been very influential?
Well, when you say that, when I go into art galleries, I look at specific pieces of art and look at how I can transfer that to what I do. That tree that I mentioned came from the New York, the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. I saw some images in there that I liked, and I sort of took note of how the tree was composed, and I used that tree. When I went to the Picasso Museum, same thing. So when you say, which ones do I like in particular? Well, the one I'm looking at that time.
Sure.
That's the one I like, because they expand your mind, and they get you to think about different things, and how you can use the same medium to do something that you haven't done before.
Oh, yes. I always enjoy looking at artworks of artists that use what we call non-local color. So instead of rendering a person's face in what you would think is the colors of their face, the artists use things like orange and pink and purple.
And what I find, too, you're mentioning faces, that's interesting, because I now see different things in faces.
Okay.
When you look at somebody, you kind of see the shadows and the light parts of their face, and you see some of the different contours and textures in the faces, and you can use that. But you now no longer look at that person the same way, because now you're looking at how the face...
The parts of the face?
Yeah, the parts of the face, how it attracts certain features, how the light focuses. And I tend to do that when I'm out. I take a look and see how the light is working to make that person look the way they look.
That's very interesting. So you mentioned that you have artworks on display around town. Can you tell us about...
Well, the Groman Museum downtown, and if anybody has never been to the Groman Museum, they've got to go. It is by far the #2 museum in Milwaukee. It is devoted to human endeavor.
Okay.
In other words, people working.
Yes.
Right? So my very quick and dirty background, my father went into the mines when he was 16, the coal mines. And we moved from a little place where I was born called Lore City, Ohio, which you've never heard of, to Canton, Ohio. And he went from the coal mines to the steel mills. And the piece that's hanging in the Groman is of steel workers.
Oh, okay.
And I call it Men of Steel. I also have coal miner that I've done too, as a tribute to my Slovak American ancestors who came here to work the coal mines.
Right.
So that one is all, and that whole museum, which is a fantastic museum, is devoted to work.
Mm-hmm. If
people have not been there, by all means they should go. And it's a League of Milwaukee Artists exhibit. I was the president of the league for 4 years.
Okay.
So, I still have a lot of ties to the league.
Sure.
The one in Plymouth, which has an opening reception, I know this is not going to be timely, but there's an opening reception tomorrow night at Plymouth, and it's one of my crane prints. I have 6 different crane prints right now. I mentioned the cranes that I did.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have a sandhill crane,
mm-hmm.
one. I also have 4 whooping cranes, 2 of which have sold. And the one that's hanging there are Japanese cranes. Now, why is that? Well, because the body shape is the same.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is where the feathers are, the colors of the feathers.
Okay.
The blacks and the whites and
mm-hmm.
the browns. But if you just take a look at the body shape,
mm-hmm.
it is the same body shape. And as I tell people, you can tell it's a Japanese crane because there's a pagoda in the print. I would not put a pagoda in anything but a print of a Japanese crane.
Especially if you live in Cedarburg. So
go ahead. I hope I've answered that whole thing about inspiration, because I think inspiration is where you find it. I don't know there's any one thing that inspires you. I think it's just looking around and seeing things that make you think about things a little differently.
Oh, sure. I oftentimes like to walk around and look at things, and a certain color might be inspiring, or the shape of something, or any number of things.
Absolutely. And that's where the best inspiration comes from.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's one of those. I don't think you go out looking for inspiration. I think it's like a bolt of lightning.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You just see something, you go, whoom.
Right.
That's it.
And it's the artist's task to feel that inspiration and then translate it into an artwork.
Yes, I agree with you. Good. Yeah. So I hope that was an answer to your question about how that occurs, because quite frankly, I really don't know how it occurs. It just occurs.
Sure. Yeah. There are different styles of working. There are other artists that might do sketching or studies all the time because they have a specific goal or piece that they want to create. And then there are others, such as yourself, who find inspiration in these small things and make it into a great artwork.
And I know the artists that do the sketching you're talking about,
mm-hmm.
and they plan out their piece, and I get the question of, why did you decide to put that there? And I really have to think about that answer.
Yes.
I don't know why I decided. It just, It worked.
It felt right.
So, it felt right,
mm-hmm.
so I put it there.
Mm-hmm. Now, you also regularly show your works at the Holiday Fair.
I am at the Holiday Art Fair pretty much every year for the last,
mm-hmm.
10, 12 years. And it's a wonderful event, not just for the people that come, but it is a great event for the people that come. It's for the artists, too.
Mm-hmm.
We have a group of artists. A lot of us have been doing that for longer than I've been doing it even.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a lot of camaraderie there.
Mm-hmm.
We know each other, and our booths are pretty much in the same location that they have been for the last 10 or 12 years.
Uh-huh.
And we do potluck in the back, and everybody brings food, and when the customers aren't there, we are sharing a lot of things that it's just like a class reunion,
Sure.
Not that we don't see each other. I mean, we're all in Cedarburg, but the Artists Guild has about almost 300 members now, the Cedarburg Artists Guild. When you consider Cedarburg, the city of Cedarburg is roughly 12,000.
Yeah.
I live in the town, that's about 6,000.
Mm-hmm.
So that's around roughly 18,000 people. The guild is about 300 artists.
Right. Yeah.
That's a lot of artists.
Yeah, it is. Now, do you have any plans this summer of new works or travels to inspire works?
I get up in the morning and I say, what do I want to do today? And I kind of go in that direction.
Okay.
Certain things I have to get done.
Right.
Absolutely have to get done.
Uh-huh.
But there are certain things that you say, you know what? I feel like doing this today.
Uh-huh.
When I took out some of the backgrounds that I hadn't worked on in ages, and you took a look at it, and then my wife will tell you that, then I focus. I'm intense.
Mm-hmm.
When I start a piece of art, I'm always thinking about it. Even when I'm not working on it, I'm thinking about it.
Sure.
And so I'll get up early and work on it. And even in the middle of the night, it's kind of crazy, but 2 and 3 in the morning, sometimes that's when your best work happens. You just sort of get up and start working on it.
Right. Well, it's been a pleasure interviewing you today, Jack.
Well, thank you, Laura. It's been a pleasure being here.
So we have a number of artworks of Jack Pachuta's hanging here at Cedarburg Public Library, a number of his monoprints and calligraphs. And be sure to stop in soon to see his works. And if you are also around town, his works are also at the Pink Llama Gallery on Washington Avenue and the other museum, the Groman Museum, and the Plymouth Museum.
It's at the Plymouth Art Center right now. Yeah, one of the crane prints.
Great. Well, thanks for talking with us today, Jack.
Well, my pleasure.
And this has been another edition of Art Talk.